Hi there, my name is Nicole Hebert with the Moose Journey to Hope team, and this is Voices of Recovery.
Yeah, so I know for me, like I'm pretty well an open book. I have no problem sharing anything because I'm a firm believer in that, you know, the more information that's out there that hopefully somebody else can learn from, you know, things that I had to maybe figure out on my own. Yeah. And like I know for me, when I first found out about like my mom's addiction and stuff, my first thing to do was like I started Googling like, you know, what do I do with this and how do I handle my mom being an addict? And the biggest thing that I noticed was that there's not a lot out there for family members of addicts. You know, there's a lot out there for, you know, my child is an addict or, you know, things like that, but nothing from the other side. And so I felt very lost and I felt very like, I don't know what to do and I don't know how to deal with this and I don't know who to talk to about it because, like, I couldn't talk to my mom because she was the active addict in my life.
Yeah.
And so, like, for me, it's not necessarily that I'm looking to get anything for myself out of it, because I have felt like I have navigated things quite well, but I'm hoping that, you know, by having the family member's perspective that maybe there'll be somebody else that will listen to it. You know, my mom's an addict or my dad is an addict, and, you know, this girl went through the same thing. To me, the first thing that I felt was, like, shock, because, like, I kind of grew up, like, in high school, like, we got talked to about drugs and, you know, things like that, but I always had that thought of, oh, well, that happens to other people. That'll never happen to me or anybody that I know. And so when I first found out about her addiction, it was very, like, surreal feeling.
Yeah.
And immediately my first reaction was, well, how can I help her? I can help her get better. And that was probably my biggest hurdle that I had to get over, was realizing that I couldn't be the one that got her better and that she had to do it for herself.
Right.
My mom and I, like, we were always very close. Like, I always considered my mom my best friend growing up. You know, she was the cool mom that let everybody come over. And, you know, I didn't have a lot of rules because I was a relatively good kid. So I kind of was allowed to just, you know, live my life, and she kind of was along for the ride. And, you know, when I first found out, I felt like very betrayed because it was like, well, how could you do this to me? Like, you know, like my confidant, my best friend, and, you know, and I had no idea. Like, I was completely blindsided by it, you know, because she was working and, you know, doing all those things that your normal, average, everyday person would do. And it was like, well, you know, if you're an addict and you're using drugs all the time, how are you going to work? And, you know, like, how did I not see that? Because, you know, we were so close. And then it was that moment of, like, when she told me, like, you know, I have a meth addiction, and it was like, oh my goodness. And then suddenly it was things that I had noticed but had kind of not really noticed all of a sudden started to make sense. And then I started to, like, oh, like, you know, I did kind of notice that something was off, but I didn't think that it would be that. Because one of the things I found when I was Googling and everything is, like I said, there's not a lot of support for the family members of addicts. And, you know, like, I found, like, oh, there's NA meetings, and I'm like, okay, well, that's, you know, that's cool, but, like, that's not really for me. And then it was like, oh, there's Al-Anon, and I'm like, well, I'm not really the spouse of an addict, so, like, that doesn't really, you know, kind of cover what I'm looking for. And, like, you know, because Al-Anon is more of, like, the alcohol side as opposed to the drug side. I'm like, well, no, that's not really what I'm looking for. And other than that, like, those were kind of, like, I kind of hit a dead end after that. And, you know, so a lot of it was, like, you know, through my own job that I do, I deal with a lot of addiction every day. And, you know, kind of seeing, like, oh, okay, that's what that looks like, and that's what this looks like. And, you know, I'll admit, when I first started doing everything with my mom, looking back on it now, I very much enabled a lot of her addiction, because I thought by what I was doing was helping her, and I didn't realize that what I was doing was actually hurting her in the long run.
Right.
And, you know, it was a lot of trying to figure that out, and it was mostly just, like, trial and error, like, okay, I can do this, and this worked. And, okay, I'm going to do this. Nope, this didn't work. This didn't do anything, so we won't do that again. And, you know, I went through the whole gauntlet of, okay, well, I'll be mad at her and I won't talk to her. Well, no, that didn't solve anything. And then it was, well, I'll cry on the phone and make her feel guilty. Well, no, that didn't do anything. And so, yeah, like I said, it was a lot of very personal, and, yeah, and, like, I did very much kind of through my own choice of keeping it to myself. And also because I very much felt like with the day and age that we're in, like I know addiction and stuff is starting to get talked about a little bit more, but it's still not talked about a whole lot. So there isn't a lot of like, okay, you're the family member of an addict, here's a program for you. Or, here's, you love an addict, here's somebody you can call and talk to. And so it was a lot of just kind of navigating it personally on my own. I think kind of where I finally kind of had a little bit of a breakthrough was I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. That, that's what was going on, because I found that through trying to help my mom and keep it to myself, I started keeping secrets from a lot of people that I loved and cared about. And, that kind of started to eat away at me, because it was a lot of, well, how's your mom doing? Oh, she's doing really good. How's her job? Oh, it's awesome. And when in reality, like, everything was falling apart, but
right.
I didn't want anybody else involved. So, like, the first person I told was my grandma, and then she became a good, not necessarily that, like, she knew all the answers for everything, but it was good that I had somebody that I could, bounce how I was feeling off of, and, vice versa. And so instead of me kind of having to shoulder the burden of my mom's addiction all by myself, I finally had another person. And, I come from a family of alcoholism and stuff like that. So from, like, my grandma's background of dealing, with different alcoholics and stuff in our family, she had something a little bit different that she was able to bring to the table.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I eventually had that realization of that some of the things I was doing was enabling her and not helping her, because I started telling, my grandma about, I'm paying for her to live in a hotel so she's not homeless, and I'm buying her groceries and I'm paying her bills, and, because she'd call me and, she'd cry, and then I'd feel bad because she's my mom and I wanted to help her, and, and I found out that wasn't helping her. And it was kind of just that realization of like, oh, okay, you do know a little bit more about this than I do, so I'm going to let you help me.
Which is really good. I imagine, too, that might have been, I think that's one thing that's always expressed in recovery is sometimes that almost like that pay it forward cycle. Because I imagine, too, for your grandma, that might have been helpful for her to maybe process like what she had gone through and what she had learned, and just kind of see like full circle, like, wow, like, I was like right in your seat at one point.
Well, and I think like for her too, it kind of helped her realize that, like by talking to my mom and stuff like that and finding out like, oh, this is the reason, same as kind of I had that, maybe she's acting like this or she's talking like this, and, it helped her put some of those pieces together as well. Yeah, I think for me, like I said, like I know addiction is one of those funny things, because like you try and be so positive, but it's like addiction is such a negative thing, so it's hard to be positive all the time. And I think like for being the family member talking to, say, another family member who might be listening to this, the big thing is don't try and think that you can deal with it all by yourself. Is that even though you might feel like there's no resources out there, just talking to somebody, even if that person doesn't have all of the answers, just being able to get it off your chest and being able to share it with somebody else is so helpful. And to just know that, even though your loved one is going through addiction and it's hard and it's tough, that not all days are bad. And to not get stuck in the negative side, and that even on your hardest days and even when things look like they're so dark, is to never give up hope that, that your loved one or somebody is eventually, hopefully one day, going to have that breakthrough. And, one of those times is going to go to rehab, or is going to go to detox, or is going to wake up one morning and decide, like, I don't want to do this anymore, and it's going to stick. And, like I said, even though it's super hard to think that way, lots of times, especially when you're, in the throes of, those deep, dark places, is just to try and keep that in the back of your mind, is that, it's not all bad. And, I even for myself, I have days where I frequently have to remind myself that, there is a light at that end of that tunnel, and I don't know when that light is going to show or how it's going to show, but it will. And, to not just cut that person off, and to love them no matter what they're going through, is to just keep loving them.